The war drums appear to be beating. By the end of May, American intelligence agencies came to a startling conclusion, which is that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was preparing for an imminent and possibly unilateral military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, Netanyahu has spent more than a decade warning that Iran was nearing the so called breakout point, the ability to rapidly build a nuclear weapon. But until now, he's always called back down under the pressure of US presidents who feared plunging the region into another all out war. It seems that in this case, that's really not the case. The New York Times reported this week that according to leaked intelligence and senior US officials, Netanyahu wasn't just planning a limited strike, he was considering a broad military campaign that could threaten the very stability of the Iranian regime. And he was willing to go at it alone. So this left President Trump with a choice: keep pushing diplomacy or risk getting dragged into a war he claimed to oppose. Just this April, Trump rejected Netanyahu's call for military action, and by late May, as back-channel talks with Iran stalled and pressure from hardliners mounted, Trump began to shift. So here's where we really start to see things get more dangerous. Even though there's no clear evidence, at least from US intelligence, that Iran was accelerating a nuclear weapons program, Trump's team began weighing responses: do nothing and watch, join Israel outright and push for regime changes, or take a middle route. Trump chose the third path. The U.S. began covert intelligence support to Israel, and then Israel jets hit Iranian targets last week. Washington's tone changed very fast. At first, the White House tried to distance itself from the strikes, but when Israel's assault appeared to succeed, at least in its early phase, Trump went public, ramping up for the pressure on Iran. And then came this, a threat posted online by Trump himself, calling for Iran's, quote, unconditional surrender, and yes, that is in all caps, and warning that U.S. forces know that Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, is hiding. As of this recording, U.S. aircraft are reportedly en route to the Middle East, with officials considering using 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs to destroy Iran's underground facility at Fordo, the kind of strike that would have been unthinkable just 2 months ago. Iran, meanwhile, has responded defiantly. After Israeli airstrikes reached the outskirts of Tehran early Wednesday, Iran's supreme leader appeared on state TV, rejecting U.S. calls for surrender and warning that any direct U.S. military involvement would cause what he called irreparable damage. At this moment, we're watching a fast-moving and complex geopolitical situation unfold, one with far-reaching implications for regional stability, international diplomacy, and global security. All right, so Nolan, Dickey, let's detox this story. I especially want to be mindful of how fear, particularly fear with war, can really be used to shape public opinion and drive media narratives. So I have really two questions to kick us off. The first is, how can we critically engage with coverage of potential military conflict without falling into panic or even passively accepting escalating rhetoric as inevitable? And then the second question is really just, what responsibility do you feel like journalists and media consumers have when it comes to amplifying or de-escalating the messages we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I've been saying to a lot of people that I feel like I'm back in 2003, and I know other commentators have made this same case. And for folks out there who don't know, the whole reason I got involved in studying media and propaganda was because of the 2003 invasion in Iraq. I was a student at the time, watching the propaganda blitz from the government. And this gets to your question, Sydney, which is, a lot of people like to go back and blame the Bush administration, and there's upteen examples of how the Bush administration knowingly lied to the American public in 2003. But I always like to point out they wouldn't have been able to succeed in that if the media hadn't amplified those messages. If people like Judith Miller at the New York Times hadn't basically been a stenographer for power and taken what people had said, the lies about WMDs and government, and then broadcast them to the public. And so I think your other part of your question about fear, people have to be really skeptical of media at this point in time. One of the big revelations that was undercovered in Jake Tapper and Alexander Thompson's book on the Biden years was that basically Tapper said that he didn't think the media was responsible for not reporting on Biden's condition because those who knew Biden's condition in government had lied to him. So essentially, Tapper is admitting that he sees his job as being a stenographer for those in power, and that's really dangerous because historically, when war is on the table, war. Let's be honest, war is essentially when you ask people to go to war, you're essentially asking them to engage in murder. And most people won't do that unless they can be propagandized to dehumanize the enemy and believe what they're doing is altruistic. And there's upteen examples of government and media working together to spread fear based on lies to get people into war. I just mentioned the WMDs, but the Gulf of Tonkin lie in Vietnam, the lies around the Lusitania in World War One. The lies about the Kuwaiti babies in incubators during the first Gulf War, and on and on and on. These lies are typically used to get people to support war, and the media really amplifies them. And the problem is, and this is something it's frustrated me my whole life, is that everybody gets all excited to go to war based on lies, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, you start to get leaks or people in media and the establishment changing their mind, saying like, yeah, that was a lie. And then by like 5, 10 years later, it's in history books that it was a lie. And historians and journalists pat themselves on the back for getting the story right. But by then, millions of people have died, trillions of dollars have been spent, civilizations have been erased. And I think we're seeing that, now. I was watching the CNN last night, and they were showing a lot of stories about the plight of the Israeli people, how they were being attacked by Iran. One of them was an example of a woman who had to give birth underground. And look, it's an absolute tragedy for the people of Israel. And this, I'm not trying to get in the middle of Israel versus Iran. Instead, what I'm going to say is, why didn't the media extend that same type of coverage to the people in Gaza when they had to give birth in a war zone? They also have talked about, they've pulled out some of the lies they used for Iraq, saying that the people in Iran have been under the same leadership for 35 years. They want to be free. That's the same stuff they told us on the eve of Iraq, right? We're going to go in and they're going to greet us as liberators, which was, totally untrue. Evidenced by the fact that still to this day, when the U.S. government says Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, that basically is admitting Iraq is not. We failed in that endeavor. I could go on and on about this, but so many of the lies are just baseless claims. Like they say Iran is the biggest supplier of terrorism. They don't give us any data to explain how they quantify that. They depend on Netanyahu's word about Iran um, cultivating nuclear weapons. That's the same thing they said about Saddam Hussein in 2003. And let's not forget, Netanyahu said Iran was weeks or months away from getting nuclear weapons in 2012. He said that again in 2015. He said that again in 2018. And now he's saying it here. So at least the last 3 times he said it, it's definitely been a lie. So my advice and answer to your question is, yeah, I think you're completely right, Sydney. Do not give in to the fear and be very skeptical of the media that you're engaging with.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so well said, Nolan. So well said. I just think it's really important not to tune out and to really dig in to your the consistent, independent, investigative reporters who are out there who challenge the claims of sort of the dominant power structures and the corporate media. I mean, what you when you brought up Jake Tapper and sort of being the stenographer of truth, yeah, the corporate media doesn't report on power. It just aligns with it. They are pumping out what the sort of the established arbiters of truth say is true, and they don't ever question it. And I think yeah, how do we critically engage, or what responsibility do not only journalists but also media consumers, like everyone, the sort of the masses, what questions we should ask is just always returning to who's benefiting from this framing. And
Mm.
I like Netanyahu, as you mentioned, has been uh, for decades telling this story. And I mean, even and it, yeah, completely benefits from this framing of the so many headlines that frame this conflict as inevitable. I also think that yeah, the inevitability. It's like we have no choice, and I think that there actually is a lot of choice. There is a lot of evidence out there that's counter to the argument they're making, and it's important um, to I mean, we have access to so much information, and it's important to reach it. And it's also, you have to have that sort of system of discerning what's true and what's not. And that's
Mhm.
those yeah these questions that can help us guide, which is who benefits from this framing, and um, doing a little bit of an analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I think about a lot just because I'm in the mental health space, and particularly with these kinds of stories, stories of war, stories of escalation, things that people really do fear and are afraid of and scared of on a more daily basis. I think about like kind of the mental toll that can happen for people when they're constantly being trying to engage with these media narratives that are escalating their fears or putting them into a state of anxiety. And I wonder when it comes to analysis, when it comes to trying to look into independent journalists and trying to, it's almost a full time job. You know, I think we do this and it's easier for us because we have this skill set. But I wonder for people who are kind of just people, everyday people who are consuming news, how can we kind of encourage them to do that but not deteriorate their mental health, or at least put them in a place where they are emotionally capable of engaging with these materials?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and Dickie's point about asking who benefits is a great starting point from a lot of these stories. I mean, if you keep asking who benefits from this story and you keep finding the same country or the same actors, chances are you're looking at some pretty biased and slanted content. So I think that's a good lesson there for sure. I also want to, on the opposite, perhaps of giving into fear is showing some courage and bravery.
Mm.
And I know I've done this personally with Iraq in 2003 and the Russiagate nonsense and the Biden nonsense. When you call out these falsehoods as they're happening, you'll get maligned and attacked as a conspiracy theorist. I've been called every name in the book, but here's the positive side of that. If you just take the hits, kind of roll your eyes at the bad faith attacks, engage with the good faith criticisms of your argument, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, people remember that you were actually the one who had a brain and were able to critically think through the evidence in front of you. And that's worth its weight in gold. So oftentimes, I just kind of take the hits now and write down the names of the people throwing the hits so I can look them up 5, 6 years down the line when they've changed their mind and remind them that they really have to do some critical work to develop critical thinking skills.
That's funny. I know for, I think, students too, it can be really difficult to engage online and to be criticized. I know that even so silly things like peer review is really difficult for students because you're facing people critiquing your work or your intelligence. And I think that that can be
Right.
very difficult and eye opening. And I think when it comes to things like writing or communication or online speaking, everyone always has an opinion, and it can be very difficult to kind of navigate those opinions. But I love this idea of asking who benefits from this and then just engaging in a deeper conversation and engaging with these good faith arguments. I do think that constructive criticism is one of the best ways to learn and best ways to engage with people. So I think that can always be so helpful and really interesting to be able to engage with. So, in terms of this second question, I wonder if there is also ways that you would recommend people look at specifically maybe social media and the ways that we're amplifying or de-escalating messages we're seeing right now. For example, would you recommend that people continuously post or update or repeat these narratives that we're seeing online, especially in relationship to war? Or do you think it's important to take a step back in moments like this where we're seeing escalation get larger and larger?
I'll take just part of that question. I know we have to wrap this segment up. I'll just say really quickly that I think a lot of people mistakenly think of social media as the great equalizer, that we're all on the platform together, sharing together. But really, it's just a digitization of the problems with corporate media. A
Mm,
handful of corporations control social media. Those who have money, power, and influence can dictate what can be on the platform, what can be not, what can be amplified, what can be shadow banned. And there's very powerful forces, including the United States government and other forces that shape what's on these platforms. So when you go on this platform, don't think you're being heard and don't think you're getting the whole truth, and be skeptical of everyone you see, because we don't have enough time to go into this, but there's so much evidence and reporting on the amount of money the government spends on PR campaigns to do things like, which you wouldn't believe, but edit Wikipedia, create bot accounts, pressure social media companies to remove certain content. Right, this is the whole thing that happened during TikTok. TikTok wouldn't play ball and remove content that made people feel empathetic to the plight of Gazans. And so the United States government threatened to shut down the platform, where the rest of the oligarchs who are now surrounding Donald Trump were more than willing to suppress information to please those in power, whether it be Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So I would just tell people, like, if you really care about the war, either you're anti-war or for one side or the other, I wouldn't rely on social media. I would give that issue the respect you think it deserves.
mm, yeah.
Yeah, I think just real quick, like it's the question of whether it's important to step back. I think yeah, you got to step back sometimes, but it's not a retreat. It's just to be able to return with clearer eyes. And I think clearer eyes means remembering that there's more than just one story out there. The constant uh, churn of leaks and spectacle and outrage is really designed to keep you reactive rather than like
Mhm.
reflective or responsive. And so I think we are allowed to unplug a bit, but you have to come back sharper and then do that, sort of analysis of who's gaining from this ideologically, materially, politically, who's and but yeah, that stepping back and not constantly being a part of the chaos is helpful for discernment and for not burning out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads really well. I'm just thinking a lot about social media right now. I'm thinking a lot about AI right now, kind of all of the implications that those have. So I think that'll lead good into our next story.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in to the Disinfo Detox. If you're enjoying the content, head over to nolanhigdon.substack.com for full access to the podcast as well as other original essays. Want to support the Detox? Consider becoming a paid subscriber. You'll get early and exclusive access to interviews, podcasts, essays, and more. If a subscription's not in the cards for you right now, no worries. Just like, share, subscribe, comment, and follow. It helps grow the audience and spread the word. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep detoxing the disinfo.